It's January 1855. It's a Saturday. It's 2 weeks after Christmas. The winter cold has taken hold over South Bend, but the temperatures are rising in a frightening hurry at Alexis Coquillard's downtown mill. It's a fire. It burns quickly, and it leaves behind nothing but smoke and ash and the skeleton of a building. It's the kind of thing that happens more frequently than you would think, but it's still a tragedy, and it's about to get worse. On Monday morning, Alexis Coquillard inspects the wreckage of his mill. He's 59 years old. It's not the first business disaster that's come his way. He takes it in stride, the way he took all of it in stride ever since he got here. He looks over the mill. He assesses the damage. He tries to figure out what he's going to do next, but he won't get the chance. Coquillard was high in the mill when a wooden beam gave way beneath his weight. He plummeted to the floor of the mill, 16 feet, maybe 18 feet. He struck the front of his skull. He did not speak again. Alexis Coquillard was declared dead within the hour. South Bend was not yet 25 years old. The funeral procession that followed his remains to the chapel at Notre Dame was one of the largest South Bend had ever seen, and the mourning passed through all of the places he'd built and the places that had faded away. The trading post was gone. The portage economy was gone. The Potawatomi Indians were gone. The fur company that had brought him here was gone. Every single reason that Alexis Coquillard came to this place was gone years before he was, but here was South Bend, and South Bend was very much alive. The streets he had drawn on a map in 1831 with Lathrop Minor Taylor were still there, and they still are. The courthouse he had helped to guarantee was still there. The university he had helped Father Sorin build was still there, and it still is today. He arrived when there was nothing. He died when there was a town. Today, we're going to remember some of the people and some of the moments that got it there. Hello and welcome to A Bend in Time, presented by the History Museum in South Bend. I'm your host, Aaron Helman, and during this series, we're exploring the earliest years of South Bend, long before it was incorporated as a city, long before the Civil War, back in the earliest years when it was just a few pioneers scratching out a living. During the course of this episode, you'll hear fictional advertisements for very real historical companies and products. We do that to help break up the podcast, provide some levity, to include just a little more history than we could otherwise, and to give you a sense of the time and place when and where all of this is happening. The absence of actual paid advertisements is made possible by the generosity of our donors and sponsors. And now, with all that out of the way, let's talk about some of the important milestones and some of the famous firsts in the history of South Bend. We'll start with a man who's responsible for quite a few of those, and one we haven't talked about yet, Horatio Chapin. Horatio Chapin arrived in South Bend in 1831 on horseback, following the trails that the Potawatomi had worn into the earth across generations. He had started in Massachusetts, spent a few years in Detroit, and when he arrived in South Bend, he found a place that consisted of about a dozen log cabins. He was 28 years old. He had come to sell things. That was the plan anyway. He applied for a license to sell foreign goods, which in 1831 meant anything that came from across state lines, and he opened the first proper dry goods store in South Bend. He sold the kinds of things a place needed if it was going to be a proper town: bolts of cloth, hardware, sugar, tools. Unlike the traders who sold whatever they could get at a deal, but only when they could get it at a deal, Chapin made sure he was stocked with a steady supply of goods that people could count on. By the time Chapin was done in South Bend, he'd be involved with a lot more than dry goods, and he'd be the first guy here to do a lot of things. The first gap, he noticed, was a Sabbath school. South Bend had taverns, trading posts, and a newspaper, but it didn't have anywhere for children to receive a proper religious education. So Chapin went around to the different religious families in town and made the case for one. They held a meeting, they organized a school, they elected Chapin as its superintendent. He was the first superintendent of the first Sunday school. Old settlers would later call him the pioneer of Sabbath schools in St. Joseph County, Then came the Presbyterian Church in 1834, and Chapin was a founding member of that, too. And then came incorporation. South Bend was formally incorporated as a town in 1835. For the first time, it had an official governing board, and Horatio Chapin was the first president of the board. The man who had ridden into town 4 years earlier to open a dry goods store was now helping to run the place. For what it's worth, Chapin also took out the first personal ad in a South Bend newspaper. A lovesick paragraph in 1832 where he writes that he hopes to find a woman of amiable acquaintance and a good education. In his History of St. Joseph County, Charles Chapman wrote that Chapin was a man of considerable culture, acquainted with medicine, theology, finance, horticulture, and natural science. He wrote that Chapin possessed the rugged strength of the oak. Chapin was the kind of fellow who found problems and saw gaps, then raced to solve them and fill them. More often than not, he was the first one to do it. But of course, he wasn't the only one. We've already met Peter Johnson, who built the first keel boat, and Medore Crate, the first man to captain it. Ben Coquillard opened the first hotel and tavern. J.D. DeFries started the first newspaper. Jacob Hardman rode in from Ohio to be the first doctor. Elisha Egbert opened the first school in the mornings and practiced the first law in the afternoons because one job wasn't enough for a frontier town that needed two. You could argue all you want about what it takes to make a town. Is it a plat? An incorporation? A government? Nah, it's easier than that, especially in the 1830s. A town in the 1830s was a place you could live in that had everything you needed. At some point around 1835, South Bend became that kind of place, thanks to the entrepreneurial spirit of a lot of people who made sure that their neighbors had the things they needed. When we get back from the break, we'll meet some of the first people who were a part of the first official governments.
A companion wanted. A young gentleman wishes to be married to a worthy young lady with an amiable disposition and a good education. The gentleman has means of genteel living, and while it is desirous that his partner have a small fortune of her own, such is not an indispensable requirement. Send a letter to HCC through the post office to inquire. And now, back to A Bend in Time, presented by the History Museum.
On September 7, 1831, the newly organized government of St. Joseph County got down to business for the first time. The first order of business was wolves. The county commissioners set a bounty on wolf scalps, 75 cents for an adult wolf, 37.5 cents for a pup. This was not unusual. Wolves were a genuine problem on the Indiana frontier, a threat to livestock and to the livelihoods of the farming families who were arriving in larger numbers every season. The bounty was practical, necessary, and thoroughly unglamorous. It was exactly the kind of thing that a county government existed to do, but yes, the second order of business was slightly more consequential. On that same day, the commissioners voted to move the county seat to South Bend, persuaded by a $3,000 bond signed by Alexis Coquillard and Lathrop Minor Taylor, along with a few other local leaders, Joseph Rower and Samuel Studebaker, who was not related to the more famous Studebaker family who would come later. The third thing the new county needed was to elect the people who were going to run it. The first roster of county officials makes an impressive list of early pioneers and local street namesakes. Lathrop Minor Taylor became the first clerk, recorder, and auditor of St. Joseph County. He was already South Bend's postmaster and the man who'd platted half the town. Now, he was also the one who kept the county's records. Samuel Cottrell became the first sheriff. Cottrell had arrived in 1828, settled near the trading post, and became one of the first men in the county to obtain a license to sell liquor. When men got in trouble for drinking a little too much, Cottrell was the first one with the authority to arrest them. Lambert McCombs, who had arrived in South Bend on the 4th of July, 1829, became the first president of the Board of County Commissioners. He was also a blacksmith and a justice of the peace. He'd later leave for the California Gold Rush in 1848 and die in Napa Valley, but in 1831 he was helping to run St. Joseph County. John Lastly, who had come to the area in 1829 and married a Potawatomi woman named Angelique, became the county's first treasurer. These were the people running South Bend before South Bend had people officially running it. The town wouldn't incorporate itself for another 4 years. In the meantime, the county government was the only government, and the only space they had to call their own was Alexis Coquillard's living room. Then the government started putting up buildings. The first was the jail, ordered during an 1831 commissioners' meeting at Coquillard's home. It was built of white oak, a wood chosen for its hardness and strength, and was completed by April of 1832. By January of 1835, the commissioners ordered a second story added. The jail, as it turned out, was filling up. The second building was the courthouse. In February of 1832, the commissioners accepted a $6,000 proposal to build it, roughly $190,000 in today's money. It was Peter Johnson they hired to build it because, of course, it was. Alexis Coquillard and Lathrop Minor Taylor get the credit for being the founders of South Bend, but in a lot of ways it was Peter Johnson who built it. The courthouse was 40 feet square, built of brick, plain and functional, and it sat at the corner of Main and Washington streets. These buildings were not glamorous, but a proper courthouse and a proper jail were the kinds of structures that made a place legitimate. A town with a courthouse was a town where disputes could be settled. A town with a jail was a town where laws could be enforced. A place with a sheriff and a clerk and a treasurer and a board of commissioners was a town that was going to be around for a while. South Bend intended to be around for a while.
On April 17, 1837, Miss M.P. Hunt will open a school for the reception of young misses in the schoolroom at the corner of St. Joseph and Pearl Streets. Instruction to be given in reading, writing, grammar, rhetoric, philosophy, and so much more. Terms are just $5 per quarter. And now back to A Bend in Time, presented by the History Museum.
Once the people had a proper town to live in, they began to live proper lives. They worshipped in proper churches. They sent their children to a proper school. When they had to sue their neighbors, they did it through formal and proper channels. They bought property and titled their possessions. They voted. They coupled up. They started families. They had children. They passed down their possessions. They created legacies. Lathrop Minor Taylor was likely the first man to get married in South Bend, and why not? He'd already been the first to do so many other things. He married Mary Johnson, Peter's daughter, in 1833, just a few weeks shy of her 15th birthday. The following year, the boat captain Medore Crate married a woman named Elizabeth Reynolds. The record of both marriages was entered into the first marriage license book of St. Joseph County. That book has been missing since 1948. I'd sure love to find it. Married people tended to have children. The first officially recorded birth came in 1836 with a child named J.W. Camper, although it's worth noting that Pierre Navarre's children were born in the place that would become South Bend 15 years earlier. By 1840, there were kids everywhere, in cabins, playing and bathing in the river, working alongside their fathers, attending schools, and running around the riverbanks. Some of those children were born and tended to by Dr. Hardman. Maybe they were baptized by Reverend Griffith. Maybe they apprenticed beneath Captain Crate after he transitioned into becoming a blacksmith. They grew up with the town around them, a place that would change as much during the next 20 years as it did during the first 20. In 1840, South Bend's founders might have been shocked to see what their city had already become. They would be more shocked at what was going to happen next, but only Lathrop Minor Taylor would live to see South Bend reach toward its peak. Taylor died in 1892. He outlasted Navarre by almost 30 years, and Coquillard by nearly 40. Taylor saw the Studebakers and Olivers build manufacturing dynasties. He watched the beginning and end of a civil war. He saw South Bend incorporate as a city. He watched a man from South Bend become Speaker of the House and Vice President of the United States. He might have even seen Notre Dame's earliest football games. He saw the city swell to a population of more than 20,000, and in his mind, he could still remember when it was just a few of them. He remembered the streets he drew on that first map. Some of them had received new names. Some of them kept their old ones. Some of them still keep their old names today. He remembered the original buildings on those streets, and he remembered the days before the original buildings even existed. He remembered the buildings that had been toppled and the ones that had burned. He remembered the people who had built them. He remembered their families. Most of all, he remembered what it was like to build a town from an uncut wood on a curiously curved riverbank. He'd be thrilled to know that you remember it too. Hey, thanks for joining us on A Bend in Time presented by the History Museum in South Bend. There's more history waiting for you at historymuseumsb.org. I'm your host, Aaron Helman. The theme music is Whose Distance Is It Anyway by Neil Carmichael. We'll be back in just a few weeks with new episodes and a brand new series about the earliest years of Notre Dame football, the years before Rockne, before the forward pass, and before Notre Dame football meant nearly what it means today. I hope you'll join us for all of that real soon. Until then, keep learning new things, and remember, everything is fascinating as long as you stay curious.